Hello, I'd like to welcome whoever's watching this to a roundtable discussion of Rod Dreher's most recent book, Live Not by Lies, a Manual for Christian Dissidents. And to discuss this, I've assembled this panel of prestigious panel of people who have a connection to Hungary. Either Hungarian, know about Hungary. So everyone in this group is Hungarian. Of course, Dreher's book is about resistance by Christians to communism in Eastern Europe, and then he draws some parallels with America today. So I thought it's useful to discuss this with people who know about Christians in Eastern Europe. So I'm going to do like a very quick introduction. So I'm David Baer. I teach theology at Texas Lutheran University. I've written a couple books about Hungary, one on the Lutheran Church under communism, and then some critical essays about the Orban government's handling of religious freedom. So that's my background. Let me just ask maybe Alex Faludy to introduce himself quickly.
Hello, yes. So I'm Alex Faludy. I'm an Anglican priest, though presently working as a journalist in Budapest. I'm half Hungarian, and my grandparents were a part of the anti-communist resistance in the 1950s. They were both very courageous social democrat anti-communist journalists who had to run in 56. And by academic background, I'm a church historian.
And then we have Joseph Novak. Joseph?
Yes, my name is Joseph Novak. I am an all-around Hungarian. Was born and grew up in Hungary. Left Hungary when I was 22 years old in 1982. I applied for political asylum in the United States upon arriving here, and I was granted. My educational background is mainly in theology and philosophy. I studied in Budapest at the Hungarian Baptist Theological Seminary, and in Portland in the Baptist Theological Seminary. I am a Baptist minister working with an ethnic Hungarian church in the Los Angeles area. This is my 32nd year with this church. So I'm getting ready for retirement.
Okay, well, and you have your services are online on YouTube. I've been watching it, so all the Hungarian services there in California.
We are honored to have
very
you.
Good sermons. So
thank you.
Well, all right. So that as you can see, this group here, these are people with experience of life, direct experience in Joseph's case of what it was like to be a Christian in under communism in Eastern Europe. So, like, let me just so quickly, Alex, you might just say a little bit more about your grandfather because he's actually a kind of a famous person in Hungary.
Yes. So he was a major Hungarian 20th century poet, as well as journalist and literary editor. And his memoir, My Happy Days in Hell, is the archetypical description of life in the Stalinist period in Hungary, and in particular of the Hungarian Gulag, of the Rachk prison camp in eastern Hungary, which he was amongst the first prisoners to be sent to and to help build the place that would be their prison for the next few years. He and my grandmother were both Jewish, though interestingly they had my father baptized in secret as a Roman Catholic in 1955 in their flat, with the priest coming in lay clothes and everything that was needed for the service in a musical instrument case. Because even if you were an atheist Jew, if you were an opponent of the government in the mid-1950s, having your child baptized as a Roman Catholic was a very significant act of political defiance. So there's a funny way in which this sort of intersects very personally with my family's story.
Mm-hmm. And Joseph, maybe you could say, I mean, it's a little interesting. So you left, can you say a little bit about, how you left, did you say in 1982, or how you decided to leave, or what it was that led to this immigration to the United States?
Yeah, but Alex, I just read your father's poem yesterday on the anniversary of the revolution that he wrote about 1956. As I said, I grew up in Hungary in a Baptist family on the countryside. My whole family was coal miner, the man in the family, and I grew up in a small village populated by coal miners on the southern border of Hungary. I was the only one from my immediate family who was still in Hungary. My father, my mom, and my siblings came to the United States before I came. The reason I stayed back because I was a seminary student, and I felt that God called me to minister in Hungary. In the meantime, I got married. My wife spoke very good English, and I was living in Budapest, and we met missionaries from the United States quite often, and we did some things with them, like organizing a tour for a basketball team called the Athletes in Action. That was a no-no back then, and the worst thing that I did, in the opinion of my elders in the Baptist church, was that I did not let them know that a missionary from Austria, he was an American young man, was staying with us for several months. And on the way back to Austria, he was asked at the border, where did he stay? And he told us that he told the authorities that he stayed with us. So I received a call from the head of the church that I have one more act like this, and then they will kick me out. Uh-huh. And this missionary was telling me that since my parents are in the U.S., I should try to come out and continue my education here. So I knowing the system from the inside, I thought that it would be a wise decision for me to try to use this opportunity to join my family and come to the United States, and maybe later to go back to Western Europe. That was my original plan. Back at that time, they were starting a seminary in Amsterdam for Eastern European students, and I was planning to teach there. But this church invited me when I was doing my last semester, and I stuck here, and I'm happy about it. so I received political asylum.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the book then. I mean, I guess first of all, maybe we just lay out what you guys think, what each of us maybe thinks is the main argument. So I get that the central argument of the book is that the United States is entering a period of soft totalitarianism, which is rather similar in important ways to what existed in Eastern Europe under communism. And therefore, Christians in the United States should look to the example of Christians in Eastern Europe, so they can think about, Christians in America can think about how to resist this soft totalitarianism that's taking over America, or something like that. That's how I read it. I don't know. Did you guys have any thoughts about the main argument of the book?
I think broadly that works as the pith of the thing. The crucial argument I thought that Joe was making as a sort of nuancing distinction was that the soft totalitarianism was insidious. So in that it was about a kind of seductive force field that people unwittingly, to a large extent, allowed themselves to be penetrated by. And that's sort of how he distinguishes it from Central Europe. But yeah, I'd say that works as the kind of the nub of it. Yeah.
What do you think, Joseph?
Yeah, you are right. I believe so. That was his original intention. I don't agree with it, but this is what he's trying to show us, that there is an obvious parallel between the situation in communist countries in Eastern Europe and what we are experiencing here in the US.
So tell us, what is it that you don't agree with?
Go ahead, Alex.
Joseph,
No, I was gesturing to Joseph because he actually lived under communism and I didn't.
Yeah. Well, I think that he's a cultural warrior. He's working along the line of Dr. Legutko from Poland, with the exception that Legutko sees national identities and the power behind them as the right kind of force against totalitarianism that shows up even in democratic societies. And Mr. Dreher sees the church as an opposing force. Growing up in Hungary, I did not sense these kind of tensions that he's writing about. It was so natural for us. That was in the air. So it was natural for us to live with those circumstances. And I don't believe that we ever had to compromise our faith. He's talking about lying as something required of those who want to live under totalitarianism. I deeply disagree with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I experienced something totally different here in the States. The state of the church is different also in these two societies.
Okay, what do you think, Alex, of the parallel?
So there were things that I did very much like about the book. I thought it was written in a incredibly lively, engaging style. Some of the stories that were told by dissidents were very moving. I think he's right in identifying a certain convergence between virtue signaling surveillance capitalism and the sillier bits of the ultra woke left and their Marxist underpinnings. But I think there are really serious problems with the book. What Joseph has just said picks out one of them, which is that there is a very poor engagement with history. He's unable to grasp the differentials in the church-state relationship at different times and in different parts of the Eastern Bloc. And kind of everything he's read through the filter, fundamentally, of 1917. And he's unable to see how things changed and developed. And in particular, somewhere like Hungary, where certainly from 1972, and in the case of the Protestant churches, possibly a bit earlier, there was a very different settlement between the communist government and the churches. Now, that settlement was not without moral problems in any sense, but it wasn't what Dreher's talking about. It wasn't, at least in Hungary, that kind of very heavy-handed oppression, which is the premise of the book. That was more a feature of, say, the late 1940s or 1950s.
So now this is interesting because one of my thoughts about what he was saying was I thought he had a very romantic vision of what it was like to be a Christian in under communism, that these very noble people who were standing up for the truth despite whatever. And he has a couple examples. I mean, the Hungarian examples maybe aren't as good as he thinks, but I mean, so he's got a romantic idea. And my experience, or my of Hungary, as studying the churches in Hungary, is that it really isn't such a noble history of grand resistance of people who don't care and live in the truth. I mean, it wasn't so easy, and people were compromised. And the story of the church, the church leadership and so forth, is actually not a story of great resistance. So it's kind of a pretty mixed bag, or even kind of a sad story. So it's interesting to me, Joseph, when you said that you didn't feel that as a Christian in Hungary you had to compromise, or I don't remember how you said it, lie. You don't have to. You never were forced to sort of deny your faith. Because I would think when I think about the church leadership in Hungary, I mean, there was a lot of basically collaboration going on. So I don't know, how would you respond to this thought of mine?
The sentence I referred to in particular is on page 14. He says that it is difficult for people raised in the free world to grasp the breadth and the depth of lying required simply to exist under communism. No. The examples that he picks, just referring to their historicity, most of them are from the early 50s, late 40s, when there were changes of regimes posed on upon those countries by the Soviets, and that was not a soft totalitarianism at all. There were leaders who were collaborating with the government, and they basically did not live up to our Christian principles. But when I came to the United States, they always wanted me to talk about the underground church. And I really did not understand that whole concept for a good while. What on earth can an underground church be? Because understanding my Christianity, if I'm a Christian, I'm not underground. I am open about it, and we never lived underground. I found though that they were talking about house churches. That, for example, the Baptists were not allowed to build buildings with steeples. So our gathering places were just like regular homes, and we met as families. But it never was underground. There might have been leaders who had to do something that was considered illegal, but we were very open about our faith. Everybody knew us. So I don't know if I answered your question. Living there as a Christian was very, very, very natural, and I still live out that kind of faith in the United States. I don't have any problem here either.
Yeah. All right. Well, what did you think of the? I don't know. So, another way to sort of get at. Another problem I had is I just found the concept of totalitarianism that Dreher was using is really not. Just really inappropriate. It doesn't. It didn't. It just didn't seem to. I just found it inappropriate. I could go on a little bit about that, but I don't know. What did you think, Alex? What of this language of totalitarianism?
I thought that, and he has a point about the intolerance of divergent opinion in contemporary academia and certain parts of the contemporary media and cultural sphere. On the other hand, societies have norms that are informal and are imposed by various kinds of social pressure, and those forms are always contested and shifting. So I'm not quite clear. I have reservations about certain social trends in the present, but I'm not clear that one can define them as totalitarian. I think they may be uncomfortable cultural shift that I might critique, but I'm not sure I can quite use the term totalitarian.
Yeah. So, what I would say about this totalitarian argument is that, so he refers to Hannah Arendt, and, Hannah Arendt wrote this famous book on the origins of totalitarianism. And her argument was that totalitarianism, and it's a very provocative and interesting argument, but it's still controversial, that totalitarianism was a unique form of government that had never existed before, so that it differed from other forms of tyranny or despotism or whatever, because in Arndt's account, it was like political power, but not political power in the pursuit of some sort of objectives, whether it be the wealth of the leader or whatever, or imperial power. It was just sort of power for power's sake. It was kind of an insane, constant movement that is sort of unstable, irrational, and the effect of it was to sort of eradicate the human. I think she even uses phrases like that. So things like, the death camps are essential to totalitarianism, because that's where you sort of destroy all human freedom. Or terror is essential, because it's how you destroy human freedom, and ideology fits into this sort of insane political situation. So then other people didn't buy Arndt's argument. They said totalitarianism is not a unique form of government. It's just a particularly bad form of authoritarianism. Okay, so I mean, we don't have to decide that question, but I mean, if there was the kind of totalitarianism that Arndt was talking about, it was only under Stalin. You know, it was under Stalin. Hitler is that early form of totalitarianism, and later on, it became soft totalitarianism, which is a kind of authoritarian regime that has a lot of control, but it's not a sort of irrational, you know, a super violent system. So that's what Joseph was describing, you know, when he grew up in Hungary. So, but essential to it is the use of political power to sort of destroy, right? And so when Dreher talks about soft totalitarianism, he's just talking about, you know, people who are ideologically motivated or they have deep ideological commitments. Well, okay, but I mean, he even says, you know, they don't have the political power. Well, if you don't have political power, you know, then it's not totalitarian. It doesn't have total control. I mean, you can criticize it. He can publish criticisms of it. I mean, you can't do that in a totalitarian state. There's just, you know, it's not totalitarian. So it's true. Let's see. I had a quote here. I wanted to, hopefully I can dig it up. Yeah, he's got it. It's early on. He says, a totalitarian state is one that aspires to nothing less than defining and controlling reality. So here he defines totalitarianism as a kind of comprehensive worldview. Mm-hmm. Well, if totalitarianism is a comprehensive worldview, then Christianity is totalitarian. I mean, anybody who's a philosopher, who has a philosophical worldview is totalitarian. That can't be the definition of totalitarianism, that you have a view of reality, because that would, you know, anyone with sort of deep commitments is therefore totalitarian. So it's just kind of a meaningless, in my thought, it's meaningless to use the term totalitarianism there. But what it is a kind of heightened rhetoric that lets you get really, really worked up about what he calls the social justice warriors. Myself.
That sort of lack of precision is, I think, noticeable in quite a number of ways in the book. And again, sort of, you know, coming at this as a church historian, I was very struck by the absence of reliable secondary sources, either mentioned in text or listed in the bibliography. So absolutely basic works, like, I don't know, Owen Chadwick's The Christian Churches in the Cold War, or Trevor Beeson's Discretion and Valor, Religious Conditions in Russian and Eastern Europe, not mentioned at all, not engaged with. And he sort of jumps from a reading of Solzhenitsyn into his own first-hand interviews with no sort of objective verification in terms of rigorous academic research. And if your whole thing, if the whole first part of the book is premised on the idea that ideology has trumped objective standards of research in public discourse, this is not a good way of proceeding.
Yeah. He gives voice to people that he happened to meet and support his cultural warrior views. Those mentioned from Hungary, I personally never heard of them.
Well, I have. I'd heard of Maria Wintner.
Well, Maria Wintner, you've heard of, right?
Maria Wintner, because she's associated with the far right.
She was not a Christian warrior.
Well, I mean, that was the only person he mentioned some people in Hungary, but he really quotes this Wintner Maria, a big quote from her, you know, where she's talking about defending the right to speak and write freely and so forth. But we know Wintner Maria is a little bit of a you know, I don't know how to put it, a little kooky, right? If you know anything about Hungary, in fact, and this is my, you know, my book on you know,
go on, plug it again, David.
There's a quote from Wintner Maria, who lives in the truth, according to Dreher. And you know, she's in the parliament and she's opposing, and it's a discussion of whether they were going to grant legal status to sort of a small Christian group, a spin-off of Calvinism. And this is her argument why Hungary shouldn't grant legal status to this small Christian denomination. This is a quote. It's in my book. He didn't actually rely on my books either. But anyway. So She says, there was a time when we were considered pagans, yet we weren't pagans. We believed in one God. This is the Hungarians, okay? Then came the Reformation, the Reformed Church, then the Lutheran, and churches have multiplied. So she's got that wrong, obviously. And churches have multiplied, even though there was only one God. Well, even though I don't believe that this association, that's the church applying for status, even though I don't believe that this association will be able to attract many members in Hungary, I still believe that sects should not be considered churches. I don't know for what purpose or whether it is to teach worldwide hegemony and teach worldwide hegemony, but I see that the tendency today, even in religion, is to divide and conquer. We have Christianity here. We have a Catholic Church, which is more than 2,000 years old and has existed in Hungary for 1,000 years. And we have a Reformed Church as a result of the Reformation. But what I was most struck by is that 187 churches have been registered in the country since 1990. Gentlemen, there is only one God. One God. That's the truth that, Maria Wittner lives in, but of course he didn't, whatever. I just, going on about her.
And we've talked about Joe's experience in Hungary in the 70s and 80s. Now, of course, there were parts of Eastern Europe which even in the 70s and 80s had a much harsher treatment of churches under communism, particularly in the Czech Republic, in Czechoslovakia. And this again is where he commits the most kind of extraordinary errors, because he says that this family that he goes to interview is the Bender family, were the only Catholics involved in the Charter 77 movement in Prague. This is nonsense. There was Father Thomas Halleck. There was, in terms of other Christians, there was Jan Potocka, who was one of the founders of the Charter 77 movement in Czechoslovakia, and later Cardinal Tomášek was very important in the developments politically in the 1980s, and yet none of this is mentioned or acknowledged, and he just doesn't seem to be aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's try to give him a little bit of his due. I think we kind of have the same opinion, but a try here. Okay, so I mean, and you even mentioned this earlier, Alex, that I mean, he maybe has a point when he points to sort of a kind of, he calls them social justice warriors or the woke crowd or whatever. So a kind of left, far left liberal that's advancing its agenda, in a militant way, which maybe has a totalitarian, it has an ideology that it's advancing in a militant way. And you hear stuff about it. You hear about cancel culture, and I mean, I haven't experienced it actually personally, but it's in the news, cancel culture and so on. And so he's suggesting that this left liberal ideology, which is working its way into corporate America and social media and the universities, makes it impossible for Christians to be open about their faith because they'll lose their jobs or in some way suffer severe backlash, or if they don't go along with the left liberal ideology. So I don't know. What do you think, Joseph?
I see this work as a continuation of his previous book, when he tries to find a way for the church to exist in a pluralistic society, and by using these so-called examples from Eastern Europe, he's pointing out a particular way. I understand the situation is in the sense that the church finds herself in a totally new world. We are not power players. We were never in the United States as the churches were, the historic churches in Eastern Europe, and our voice is one voice amongst many, and we have to find our place in this new situation. The directives he gives, focusing on truth, living in small communities, being consequential with our faith, are biblical principles. I am okay with it. I just don't like the fact that he undermines his argument by using this not existing parallel between the current situation in the United States and what has happened in Eastern Europe. But the second half of the book I'm okay with. I actually plan to use it as in a Bible study.
Uh-huh.
He's not saying anything new, but it's in modern English.
Well, I mean, so you make this point. I mean, this is what I thought too, is that, is the problem totalitarianism or is the problem sort of secularization, right? I mean, we're clearly in an age where, of increasing pluralism and secularization, and this is a change in the way that Christians are going to live in the world, right? And it's a challenge, and it's a loss of influence, and all of these things. So it's a challenge for Christians. That's the sort of challenge of secularization, but that's a very large sort of cultural shift, historical shift that can't be reduced. It's hard to understand what's behind it, but it can't be reduced to, the fact that there are people on the left or the far left who are focusing on basically a couple of issues around sexuality, because that seems to be what gets under Dreher's skin. I mean, that's just a mad analysis of what's going on, and there are challenges for Christians, but it's related to broader changes in our culture, and not because of this ideology. I just say quickly, so I want to because I work in a university, okay, and I think it's true that in universities and academia there is a the sort of a left liberal worldview is the dominant worldview. So if you don't share the left liberal ideology or philosophy, then you're in the minority, right? And if you're in the minority, well, it's harder to be in the minority than to be in the majority, right? Because the reason you're in a minority is because people don't agree with you, right? So if you express your views or whatever, then people think you're wrong. So, I mean, that's okay. It's hard, but that's the human condition. I mean, someone's going to be in the minority, someone's going to be in the majority. And instead of sort of whining about the human condition, you just have to deal with it. So maybe there are places where there's cancel culture and stuff, but I mean, and it's true that there is this advancing of a kind of, or not really advancing, but arguing for this left liberal agenda. But if you don't agree with it, that just means you're in the minority. If you look at me, I live a very traditional, and most of Dreher's things are focused on sex, basically. That seems the things that seem to bother him, the homosexuality, the gay marriage, and he seems upset about transgender stuff. Well, I live in traditional marriage. I got a wife, I got kids. I'm not, was never divorced. I didn't cohabitate before I got married. I mean, I have the total traditional package, or pretty close. And, I'm not in any, no one at my university says, oh, well, if you live in this traditional way, you're supporting, whatever it is, patriarchy and homophobia or whatever. I mean, nobody cares. I can live this way. There's no problem.
You work at a church university.
I want. What's that?
You do work at a church university, though, so that might be slightly sheltered.
But it's in the ELCA, and it's it's a liberal church. So I mean that's
yeah, okay.
There's a liberal, dominant liberal. Not everybody is liberal, but that's the dominant philosophy, and not on a daily basis, but you confront this kind of left liberal frequently. And then if you don't agree with it, you just express your opinion, or not. You don't always have to express your opinion on everything, because it doesn't really matter. But in a totalitarian system, you would be hunting out all the people who disagreed with you and eradicating them or something, right? Like nobody, it's just, I just don't see it. I don't experience it. Although I recognize that there are these kinds of people. There might be in a minority, and I agree that Dreher is sort of a culture warrior, and it's more, the problem really seems to be that he's losing the culture war, right? And if he's losing the culture war, then that means we're living in totalitarianism. But really, what it is that we're living in a period of change, of secularization. We just have to figure out how to live in it.
Yeah. And change is uncomfortable,
right? Especially when you're losing. It's like that's not fun.
And if I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
If as Christians we take upon ourselves this mentality of worrying, being culture warriors, then the response will be similar. And I believe that we find ourselves in this exact situation, especially the evangelical community in the U.S. We are we are having a war, but we ourselves decided that this is a situation when we are in a war. So those are those few who will respond to us from the other side. They will use the same kind of language. You understand what I try to say?
Yes, I totally agree.
So we have to find another way to express our faith in this new situation that we find ourselves, that we are in a pluralistic society. There are other voices than ours, and we should not call to arms those who are our brothers and sisters, but with our example and with our teaching, to help them to live the normal Christian life that others have lived in history before us. I believe that the situation that the churches, the mainline churches, lost after the Second World War in Eastern Europe was a status quo in parentheses. That was not normal. What they have lost, that they were so powerful, they owned so much. That was a parenthesis in history itself, and they are crying about it now. The other thing about Dreher that I don't like, that he is just enamored by Orban.
Yeah.
Do I remember correctly, Alex, that you were not allowed to attend that meeting?
Yes, I was in effect, the church, while trying to write an article for the Church Times, I was forced out of the conference on Christian persecution.
Just tell us, summarize quickly what that conference was.
Well,
So for the viewers of this, give us a summary of that.
Well, it was a very strange experience because there was some sort of I had very great difficulty getting in touch with the organizers to request a press accreditation.
Eventually, the conference on like Christianity in Europe, or sorry,
it was the International Conference on Christian Persecution in December 2019, I managed to get into the conference with a pass, and then after about 40 minutes. Basically, I was forced out because an official came up and said, basically I'd been given the pass by mistake, and that I could only stay if I promised not to report anything I saw or heard, including the plenary sessions that were being broadcast live on television. Which were conditions of Christian liberty that I was unwilling to accept. So, I left the conference. The joke amongst the foreign journalists in Budapest was that Orban liked persecuted Christians so much that he decided to create one more. But yeah, I mean,
Dreher was at that conference, I believe, right?
He was there.
Yeah.
Was he? Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I certainly been quite a bit. Yeah.
Oh no, he had a meeting with Orban after that. Orban invited them to Buda, and he actually wrote in American Conservative in his magazine about the meeting, and he was just overwhelmed by the love he received.
Right, now I remember that. We think about Hungary. Okay, I don't know, soft totalitarianism but there's soft authoritarianism. And if Dreher had talked to, anybody in the church, well, not anybody, because not the Orban people, but if he had talked to people in the churches, including the established churches, right, he would have found that there's a lot more. Orban's much more controversial figure, right? I mean, and Dreher, and I'm quoting someone that I don't want to tell who they are because they're going to all in America because they'll, suffer consequences. Well, I've had conversations with people in the churches, and I wouldn't reveal their names because I don't want them to suffer consequences, although they would never ask me not to tell. But I know one, it was described to me by one person who's not just a somewhat important person an institutional person in the churches in Hungary, is that he said, you got to think of this country like a big spider web, and there's a spider in the middle, and anything that happens, the spider is Orban, the spider moves down. So if there's any moment of independence, and including in a church, They send a spider and eats it, right? So nothing happens. I mean, it all looks like it's got the facade of independence, but there's a spider in the middle pulling the strings, and any sort of resistance. That was the sort of image he used. And another person told me, the way that the churches work today in Hungary, or the way that financing the churches work, is basically on a patronage system, right? If you fall in line, what's the expression? Hungarian. What was the expression to fall out? Well, anyway, you fall out of line.
Kilo.
Yeah, don't kilo shortable. Yeah, so if you fall in line, you get a little money, because it's not regularized, it's not routinized, it's all sort of based on contracts. But if you present any problems, well, then you're not going to get any money. So the money. The churches are dependent upon money that they get from the state, and the money is distributed in ways that is clearly tied to strings and not in a transparent or public way. So, I mean, you want to look where, if that's the example of a flourishing Christianity, it's not that at all.
Yeah. Well, if I may, I can quote somebody on record, or I can refer to somebody who has spoken about this on record, and that, to my immense surprise, was Birchkai, the Reformed Bishop of Debrecen, giving an interview in Magyar Hang, the independent conservative newspaper, in June, in which he raised significant concerns about the Reformed Church internalizing the state's authoritarian culture, and that it had moved from just silence on political issues to not being able to have normal internal church debate around a number of pastoral and theological questions, even about the practice of modes for celebrating communion during the lockdown, because now the church had internalized this view that there could be only one line, even on things that were not a matter of controversy with the state.
And this is a situation that we in the US should pay attention to, because there are tendencies in our own in the US along the same lines, that those who are in power and the church's spiritual power, when they call us, when the church is used for political purposes, that is a bad deal. So if there is a parallel between Eastern Europe now, and especially Orban's Hungary and the US, I would point out that one.
The alliance with politics?
Yes.
Yeah. Which drives people away, and which sort of corrodes from within. Right.
Yes.
The other thing I thought about, Dreher's always he points to these sort of Czech groups or Czechoslovak groups of resistance under communism. They meet in groups, and so the models he has for Christians are basically little models of resistance. Which I'm not sure that's why Christians assemble together, so they can plan their resistance to maybe there is a sort of a side effect, but that's not the point. And it's interesting to me that a lot of these sorts of examples, he talks about the superficial faith of Christians today, and this, and meeting together, it sounds a little bit like, he doesn't seem to know it, but it sounds like pietism, right? And the pietists, say in Germany, they complained about the superficiality of faith, and they formed groups, or whatever they were called, conventicles, to come together, and they made intentional communities, or whatever you want to call them, and it had a lot of influence, but they didn't come together because they wanted to overturn the state. They just came together because they wanted to deepen their faith, or to be more faithful, and it had consequences. But it just seems to me, so that's one way Christians can exist in a secular or whatever, in a new situation. But if what brings you together is the determination to resist, then you're not coming together as a church.
With his first previous book, he kind of gave us ideas about how to renew the church. The Benedict option is about living out our faith in a different way, so that the church would be reformed by it, like monastic orders affected the life of the church. In this one, he opens up to the effect of a renewed church life to a larger sphere that is total society. I believe that there is a point that has to be made about the first book, that we have to find new ways of expressing our faith and new ways of living out our faith, maybe, but not with the purpose of protesting what's going outside in the world, but to renew ourselves. That should be the purpose. So I agree with that, but with this book he goes too far. This warring mentality, and as you said that we are basically against the whole world outside there. It's so unevangelical, so against Scripture.
Yeah, exactly. It's so pessimistic and desperate.
That is the other, and in his reviews he got a lot about that, about his pessimism, that he's a joyless writer.
The thing that struck me actually, you referenced the previous book, and as someone who spent 3 years training for the Anglican priesthood in a seminary attached to a monastery, I spent a lot of time reading the Rule of Benedict, because that was the governing rule for the Anglican community that I was living alongside. I found it very strange that this book had nothing to say about religious orders under communism and about monastic life. And what was one of the first coercive actions of the or one of the earliest coercive actions of the communist government against the churches in Hungary? It was to dissolve both most of the Catholic religious houses and the Lutheran deaconess communities, the way that vowed religious communities can be incredibly subversive, as well as being rather wonderful places to spend time with, doesn't come out in the book at all. And I found that quite strange.
Because it has to do with spiritual formation, and that is a whole other world, not fighting against other views outside that I don't agree with. There is a place for spiritual formation, and we should think about it.
Yeah. Well, I think that I think I'm going to draw this. I don't know how, I didn't keep very good track of the time, but I think we're getting close to an hour, and no one will watch it if it's over an hour. But I thought it was a pretty interesting. I enjoyed the conversation very much, and I hope that some people watch it when I post it on YouTube. And I thought these are some good insights that you had. So I'm glad to have had the opportunity to discuss it with you. I ought to say, we were able to do it, from all the way from Budapest to California. I'm in Texas, thanks to the wonders of modern technology, right? And which we're going to share it on social media, which, of course, according to Dreher in this book, is one of the sources of soft totalitarianism. So we certainly don't want Big Brother to watch this video, but hopefully somebody will, right? Other than Big Brother. So anyway, thank you very much, guys.